It is named in such a way that doesn't have the mini moniker, and thus it is implied that it should be considered on its own. And it really should be, because it's Josh Vergard from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And this is the full review on the Moto G. Perhaps the biggest part about the Moto G is its little price point. However, we'll get to that in a little bit because we'll start off with design. The Moto G does pretty aggressively hit the mid-range game with its smaller form factor due to a 4.5-inch screen. It is smaller, at least by today's standards, but that doesn't take away from the build quality of the phone one bit. The phone is plastic all around, smooth and somewhat slippery in the hand, and it doesn't take fingerprints very easily even though smudges might show up from time to time. The button layout is on the right and all has a very meaty feel to them. When you click down on any of the buttons or the volume rockers, you get a real stiff feel to it, and it's really, really nice. The headphone jack and the micro USB port are centered on the top and the bottom, and overall, the phone just is really easy to handle. With a 4.5-inch screen, you'll see that in one hand you are able to reach everything on the phone pretty easily without having to do any hand gymnastics. And finally, of course, the Moto G is also customizable, allowing it to have a back cover that is a different color because it is removable. One thing I will say, however, is that back cover is also quite secure. It takes quite a bit of effort to get the back cover off, so that definitely gives the Moto G a few extra points in the sturdiness category. We find some really refreshing elements in the Moto G's screen. This is a 4.5-inch 720p screen at 326 pixels per inch, and reminds us just how spoiled we can be sometimes. No, this is not a 1080p screen like we're all pretty much used to nowadays, but at the same time, even at 720p, you don't really notice that much of a difference. The screen overall does provide some pretty nice quality, as the sharpness allows for pretty good text, especially considering the size of the screen, and the color reproduction is pretty good. Even the viewing angles are quite nice, so there are some definite points in the Moto G screen here. Overall, this 720p display is just another example of how we don't necessarily need the biggest or even the highest resolution in order to have an enjoyable experience on our phones. Indeed, the Moto G comes with the Snapdragon 400, the quad-core 1.2 GHz Cortex-A7 variation backed by the Adreno 305 and 1 GB of RAM. Performance, empirically, is actually not too shabby at all. If you saw my speed test pitting the Moto G with the Snapdragon 400 against the Snapdragon 800 found in the Nexus 5, then you would know that the Moto G really didn't perform that badly at all. Yes, it came in behind the Nexus 5, but really not by much. For any of you average users out there, I am sure that you could have this phone and be able to perform all of your daily tasks without really any problems. Overall, the Moto G brings you exactly what you need, and not only that, because of its processing package, it can also go the distance in terms of battery life, which is coming up next. But in the end, the Moto G does exactly what you probably will need it to do, and if you need to get things done, you could do a lot worse than the Snapdragon 400 and the Moto G. When it comes to hardware, the Moto G does try to keep things pretty simple. 8 or 16 GB of onboard storage are available in either version of the Moto G, however, it is not expandable. The general bevy of connections are available within, however, NFC did not make the cut here. And finally, when it comes to the speakers, yes, they do get quite loud. However, the problem here is you do get kind of what you pay for, as the sound is lacking richness and fullness. Call quality left nothing to be desired, as calls came in through the phone speaker just fine, further attesting to Motorola's pedigree in that department. And in one make or break situation here, the Moto G is not LTE compatible. That means that when you use this phone on AT&T or T-Mobile, you will only get 4G HSDPA connectivity. It is definitely not as fast as LTE, but it is also not that shabby either. So if that is something that you really need, your super high-speed internet, then the Moto G is not something that is for you. One big positive point for the Moto G and its hardware is the battery life. Yes, this is actually a mid-range device with the matching specs, however, its battery is a pretty sizable 2070 mAh unit. No, it is not removable, however, you don't have to worry about that because it will go the distance. I was able to go an almost full 2 days with this battery at moderate usage. Even if I was a power user, I should be able to get a whole day's worth out of this battery and then some. So, nightly charging is something you're going to have to do, but even then, you don't have to worry about running out of juice before your day is over. When it comes to the camera, we do get a 5 megapixel shooter that is backed by a pretty simple Moto application. Quality is obviously not going to be spectacular from a budget camera like this. However, it's also not that bad at all. The pictures have good color reproduction, brightness, and have a very nice vibrancy to them, especially when you're using HDR. Speaking of which, Auto HDR inside of the camera is a really nice function that allows the camera to determine whether or not HDR is needed for the frame that it is taking. It takes some of the guesswork out of whether or not you should be using HDR for particular shots. Picture quality is quite good, like I said before. However, once you zoom into the details, you'll find that the details simply aren't there. There is quite a bit of pixelation there, and because of the low megapixel count, you won't be able to take these pictures and use them for too many applications other than the typical Instagramming or Facebooking or things of that nature. Focusing takes a little bit longer than we would like, and then once you hit the shutter button, whether or not you're using HDR, you still have to wait for the actual file to be created. When you're using HDR, it takes quite a while, which is expected, but even when you're not, it's still a little bit longer than we would like. When it comes to software, we see that the Moto G has a pretty stock Android experience with Motorola additions. However, the two big additions that were put into the Moto X that really differentiated it are not here, and this is something I'll only say this time right now. Those are the touchless control and the notification peaking. And it's pretty obvious why these two functions are not available. It is because the hardware that makes them work is simply not here. For notification peaking, we don't have an AMOLED display. For the touchless control, there are less microphones all around on the phone, and also that extra core that processes voice control is not found inside. Overall, this is a vanilla Android experience, which actually plays to the strengths of the Moto G. After all, stock Android still proves to be minimalistic, streamlined, and provides a very good experience without taking too much power at all. It's simple, doesn't really come with many crazy extras, and is still a good canvas for your creativity, and for everything that you want or need to do. And finally, we make it to price, and that's probably the biggest part about the Moto G, because at $179 you can get it unlocked at the 8GB base model. Now, I've said this for plenty of mini devices in my day, and while it is true for all of them, I have to say that it's never been truer than it is right now, because the Moto G takes the crown of being the phone for the everyman and every woman. Now, what makes the Moto G different from those other phones? Well, quite simply, it is that price. Think about the last time you complained about your phone. Maybe you complained that the screen was too big, or the handling wasn't that great, or perhaps you saw that there were a couple things that were in the phone that you didn't need, and so it felt like a waste of money. Those are complaints you're not going to have with this. The complaints with the Moto G that you might have, like maybe the screen is too small or things like that, are all based upon our wants. They're all based upon things that we truly desire, but don't necessarily need. Because even if, say, the screen is not as big as you want it to be, you still have a screen in front of you that performs quite well. Let's say you don't have the fastest processing package, but in reality, you probably don't really notice anyway. And then of course, when it comes to the battery life, the Moto G actually knocks the socks off of plenty of the high-end devices today that can't even keep up to a whole day's worth of work. And in that regard, I give the Moto G so much credit because it sets out to do particular things, the essentials, and it actually succeeds with flying colors. In the end, if you just want a phone that doesn't break the bank, then you have it right here. But also, if you want a phone that, for all intents and purposes, just works, then you also have it right here. As always, thank you guys very much for watching this full review of the Moto G. Stay tuned to Android Authority for all of the best coverage, everything from our reviews to our weekly shows. Drop us likes on our videos. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and share our videos out with whomever you like. You can follow us on social media pretty much all over the place, and you can also follow me from time to time at Joshua Vergara on Google+, and on Twitter and Instagram as Josh Salutes. Stay tuned to Android Authority because we are your source for all things Android.